On September 14, 1854, 12-year-old Mary Catherine Fletcher was picking blackberries along the stone fence that marked the boundary of the Whitman farm when she heard a sound that would haunt her dreams for the rest of her life. From somewhere beneath the rows of corn that stretched toward the horizon, she heard a human voice screaming in agony, then falling silent with an abruptness that was somehow more terrifying than the scream itself. When Mary ran home and told her father what she had heard, he dismissed it as the squealing of hogs being slaughtered for autumn butchering. But no smoke rose from the Whitman smokehouse that day, and no scent of fresh bacon drifted across the fields. The screaming had come from something far more sinister than livestock preparation. It was the sound of human harvesting on a farm where people had become the most profitable crop. This is the macabre story of the Whitman Homestead, where a family of seemingly respectable farmers transformed the fertile soil of Virginia into a killing field that would claim the lives of at least 63 victims over the span of nearly 2 decades. The Whitmans didn't just cultivate corn and tobacco, they cultivated death, turning their sprawling plantation into a systematic operation for murdering workers, travelers, and anyone else whose disappearance could be explained by the dangers of frontier agriculture. What began as opportunistic killings during harvest season evolved into an industrial-scale murder operation that used the rhythms of farm life to conceal crimes so methodical and extensive that they would redefine how investigators understood the relationship between rural isolation and systematic evil. The Whitman Homestead was established in 1831 by Jeremiah Whitman, a former overseer from a tobacco plantation in eastern Virginia, who had accumulated enough capital to purchase 800 acres of fertile farmland in the rolling hills near Lynchburg. Jeremiah brought with him his wife Constance, their 4 children, and a reputation for innovative farming techniques that promised to make the family one of the most prosperous in the region. The farm was strategically positioned along the James River trading route, where merchants and travelers regularly passed through seeking accommodation, supplies, and temporary labor during busy agricultural seasons. This location provided the Whitman family with multiple income streams, legitimate farming operations, hospitality services for travelers, and seasonal employment for workers seeking harvest jobs throughout Virginia. By all outward appearances, the Whitman family embodied the American agricultural ideal. Jeremiah was known throughout the county as a progressive farmer who employed the latest techniques in crop rotation, soil conservation, and livestock breeding. His yields consistently exceeded those of neighboring farms, and his advice was sought by other farmers looking to improve their own operations. Constance Whitman was respected as a model farm wife who managed the household operations, supervised food preservation and preparation, and maintained the vegetable gardens that supplied the family table and provided surplus crops for sale in local markets. She was particularly noted for her skill in preserving meats and vegetables, techniques that would later prove to have more sinister applications than her neighbors realized. The Whitman children, eldest son Jacob, daughter Sarah, second son Benjamin, and youngest son Thomas, were raised to understand every aspect of farm operations, from planting and harvesting to animal husbandry and business management. Their education included not only practical farming skills, but also the social graces necessary for dealing with the merchants, travelers, and seasonal workers who provided essential income for the farm's operations. What distinguished the Whitman farm from neighboring operations was the family's systematic approach to maximizing profit from every aspect of their agricultural enterprise. They had identified opportunities for income generation that other farmers overlooked, including the potential value of workers and travelers who possessed resources beyond their immediate labor contributions. The family's first murder was likely committed during the harvest season of 1833, when they killed a seasonal worker named Patrick Sullivan, who had been hired to help with the tobacco harvest. Sullivan was an Irish immigrant who had been traveling through Virginia seeking work and had no local connections who would investigate his disappearance. More importantly, Sullivan had mentioned during his employment that he carried gold coins earned from previous jobs and planned to use the money to purchase land for his own farm. Sullivan's murder established the pattern that would characterize the Whitman family's crimes for the next 20 years. The victim was selected based on his perceived wealth, his isolation from potential investigators, and the ease with which his disappearance could be explained by the normal hazards of agricultural work or frontier travel. The method used to kill Sullivan was both practical and symbolic of the family's agricultural background. Rather than using conventional weapons that might leave obvious evidence, the Whitmans employed farming tools and techniques to murder their victims. Sullivan was killed with a scythe during the early morning hours, when he was working alone in a remote section of the tobacco fields, making his death appear to be a tragic accident rather than deliberate murder. The disposal of Sullivan's body introduced another innovation that would become characteristic of the Whitman family's methods. Rather than burying the body in a conventional grave that might be discovered by chance, they incorporated the remains into their agricultural operations by burying Sullivan beneath a newly planted apple orchard. The disturbed soil appeared to be normal agricultural preparation, and the growing trees would eventually make excavation impossible without destroying valuable crops. Sullivan's possessions were absorbed into the farm's inventory through methods that the family would refine over years of practice. His tools were mixed with the farm's existing equipment. His clothing was repurposed for farm work or distributed to other workers, and his gold coins were gradually spent in different towns to avoid creating patterns that might alert merchants to their ill-gotten wealth. The success of Sullivan's murder convinced the Whitman family that their agricultural operations provided perfect cover for systematic robbery and murder. They realized that the seasonal nature of farm work, the isolation of rural properties, and the transient population of agricultural workers created ideal conditions for committing crimes without detection. Over the following years, the frequency of murders at the Whitman farm increased dramatically as the family refined their victim selection criteria and disposal methods. They developed sophisticated techniques for identifying travelers and workers who carried significant wealth while possessing minimal connections that might trigger investigations into their disappearances. Jacob Whitman, who was 21 when the family began their killing spree, became the primary executioner and tactical planner for their criminal operation. His intimate knowledge of farm operations and seasonal work patterns enabled him to identify optimal times and locations for committing murders without attracting attention from other workers or neighbors. Sarah Whitman, then 19, served as the family's intelligence gatherer and social interface with potential victims. Her role as the family's hostess for travelers and coordinator of seasonal workers gave her opportunities to evaluate prospects and extract information about their backgrounds, resources, and travel plans. Benjamin and Thomas Whitman, initially too young to participate directly in the murders, were gradually trained in the family's criminal methods as they reached adolescence. Their education included not only the practical aspects of killing and disposal, but also the psychological techniques necessary for maintaining normal relationships with potential victims while planning their deaths. The family's criminal operation expanded beyond simple robbery to include more complex schemes that maximized profit from each victim. They learned to forge documents that would allow them to claim ownership of victims' property, to impersonate missing persons in correspondence with business associates, and to manipulate estate settlements that would transfer victims' assets to shell companies controlled by the Whitman family. By 1840, the Whitman family had murdered at least 25 people and had accumulated wealth that made them one of the most prosperous farming families in central Virginia. Their success attracted attention from neighboring farmers and local officials who were curious about the sources of their apparent prosperity during economic periods when other agricultural operations were struggling. The family's response to this attention was to increase their involvement in community activities and religious organizations that would enhance their reputation as upstanding citizens while providing additional opportunities to identify potential victims. Jeremiah Whitman became a deacon in the local Baptist church and served on committees that managed community charitable activities. Constance Whitman organized social events and charitable functions that brought together the wives of prominent local families, providing her with opportunities to gather information about traveling relatives, business associates, and other potential targets who might be vulnerable to the family's criminal activities. The integration of the Whitman family into the social and religious life of their community provided them with protection from suspicion while simultaneously expanding their network of potential victims. Their reputation for Christian charity and community service made it virtually impossible for local residents to believe that such respectable citizens could be capable of systematic murder. The family's religious activities also provided them with ideological justification for their crimes, as Jeremiah developed a theological framework that portrayed their murders as divine justice against individuals whose wealth had been obtained through exploitation of others. This rationalization enabled the family members to maintain their self-image as moral people while committing acts of extreme evil. The psychological dynamics within the Whitman family during their criminal period reveal a complex system of mutual dependence and shared culpability that bound them together in their murderous enterprise. Each family member played essential roles that made the other's contributions possible, creating a web of criminal responsibility that made it impossible for any individual to withdraw from the operation without implicating the entire family. Jeremiah's role as the family patriarch and ideological leader provided the intellectual framework and strategic planning that guided their criminal activities. His background as a plantation overseer had given him experience in controlling and manipulating large groups of people, skills that proved invaluable in managing workers and travelers who were being evaluated as potential victims. Constance's domestic responsibilities included not only food preparation that could be used to poison victims, but also the management of household operations that concealed evidence of crimes and maintained the family's facade of respectability. Her skills in food preservation were adapted to include the processing and disposal of human remains in ways that would not attract attention from neighbors or casual visitors. The seasonal rhythms of agricultural work provided the Whitman family with natural cover for their criminal activities, as the intense labor demands of planting and harvesting seasons created legitimate reasons for the presence of numerous temporary workers whose disappearances could be attributed to the completion of their employment contracts. During busy seasons, the farm would employ dozens of seasonal workers who lived in temporary barracks and worked long hours in remote sections of the property. This population provided both a pool of potential victims and natural cover for criminal activities, as the movement of workers and equipment throughout the property made it difficult for any individual to observe suspicious activities. The family's murder methods evolved to take advantage of seasonal work patterns, with many killings timed to coincide with natural explanations such as harvest accidents, equipment failures, or injuries resulting from dangerous agricultural tasks. Bodies were often disposed of during periods of intensive soil preparation, when disturbed earth would appear to be normal farming activity. The discovery phase of the Whitman family's crimes began in 1851, when a prolonged drought caused water levels in the farm's wells and ponds to drop to historically low levels. The lowered water revealed human bones in several locations where the family had disposed of victims' remains, providing the first physical evidence that the farm had been the site of systematic murder. The initial discovery was made by Henry Morrison, a neighboring farmer who had been granted permission to water his livestock at the Whitman farm's largest pond during the drought emergency. Morrison noticed what appeared to be human skull fragments along the exposed shoreline and reported his findings to local authorities, triggering the investigation that would eventually expose the family's crimes. Local Sheriff James Crawford initially approached the investigation with skepticism, as the Whitman family's reputation for community service and Christian virtue made accusations of murder seem implausible. Crawford's first interviews with the family were conducted more as a courtesy to address Morrison's concerns than as a serious criminal investigation. The Whitman family's response to the initial investigation demonstrated their experience in deflecting suspicion and managing potential threats to their operation. They expressed appropriate concern about Morrison's discoveries while suggesting alternative explanations, such as ancient Native American burial sites or bones from livestock that had died during previous droughts. However, the forensic examination of the bone fragments by Dr. William Patterson, a physician with experience in anatomy and forensic medicine, revealed characteristics that were inconsistent with Native American burial practices or animal remains. Dr. Patterson's analysis suggested that the bones were from European-descended individuals who had died within the previous 20 years, contradicting the family's explanations. The medical evidence prompted Sheriff Crawford to expand his investigation to include a systematic search of the Whitman property for additional human remains. This search, conducted during the autumn of 1851, revealed the true extent of the family's criminal activities as investigators discovered burial sites throughout the farm's 800 acres. The forensic excavation of the Whitman property became one of the most extensive crime scene investigations conducted in Virginia up to that point, involving dozens of workers and lasting for several months. The systematic search revealed evidence of at least 47 murder victims buried throughout the property, with remains found in locations that demonstrated the family's sophisticated understanding of how to conceal evidence while maintaining their agricultural operations. Bodies were discovered buried beneath crop fields, orchards, livestock pastures, and even within the foundations of farm buildings that had been constructed after the murders were committed. The placement of graves showed careful planning designed to make discovery unlikely, while ensuring that normal farming activities would not accidentally expose the remains. The condition of the recovered remains provided evidence of the systematic torture and mutilation that many victims had endured before their deaths. Forensic analysis revealed patterns of injury consistent with prolonged abuse using agricultural tools and equipment, suggesting that the Whitman family had developed refined techniques for extracting information and satisfying their sadistic impulses. Dr. Patterson's examination of the remains also revealed evidence that some victims had been killed using methods specifically designed to maximize suffering while avoiding immediate death. These techniques included the use of farming chemicals to cause painful burns and infections, the systematic breaking of bones using livestock restraint equipment, and slow poisoning using toxic plants commonly found on farms. The investigation also uncovered the sophisticated record-keeping system that the Whitman family had developed to track their victims and manage their criminal operation. Hidden in a concealed compartment beneath the farmhouse kitchen, investigators found detailed journals documenting each murder, including victim profiles, method of killing, location of burial, and inventory of stolen property. Sarah Whitman's personal journal provided the most disturbing insights into the family's criminal psychology, revealing a young woman who had developed sophisticated techniques for manipulating and betraying the trust of victims while maintaining detailed observations of their suffering for what appeared to be purely sadistic entertainment. One entry from Sarah's journal, dated August 15, 1847, described the family's treatment of Maria Gonzalez, a Mexican woman who had been traveling north seeking work as a seamstress in Richmond. Gonzalez had stopped at the farm seeking food and shelter during a severe thunderstorm that made further travel impossible. Subject displays unusual resistance to standard intimidation techniques, Sarah wrote. Father believes extended isolation will break her spirit, while Mother suggests demonstrations of torture, methods on male subjects to increase cooperation. I propose combination of both approaches with manipulation of subjects' concern for younger brother, who remains imprisoned in separate location. The journal entry revealed that the Whitman family had been holding Maria Gonzalez and her 15-year-old brother Carlos in their underground holding facilities for more than 3 weeks, using each sibling's welfare as leverage to control the other, while extracting information about money and valuables they had hidden during their journey north. The psychological torture employed against the Gonzalez siblings included forcing Maria to watch, while Carlos was subjected to various forms of physical abuse, then threatening to escalate the torture unless she provided information about resources that could be claimed by the family after their deaths. This technique of using family relationships to maximize psychological suffering became a standard element of the Whitman family's methods. The murder of Maria and Carlos Gonzalez was eventually carried out using one of the family's preferred methods, burial alive in specially prepared graves that allowed the victims to remain conscious during the early stages of suffocation. This technique provided maximum satisfaction for the family's sadistic impulses while ensuring that no evidence would survive that could link the deaths to deliberate murder rather than accident. The discovery of the Gonzalez siblings' remains, along with personal effects that confirmed their identities, provided investigators with crucial evidence linking the Whitman family to specific missing persons cases that had been reported to authorities in multiple states. Their case became one of the most thoroughly documented examples of the family's crimes. The investigation also revealed that the Whitman family had been operating an extensive criminal network that included corrupt officials, dishonest merchants, and other criminal associates who facilitated their murders and helped dispose of stolen property. This network had enabled the family to avoid detection for nearly 2 decades, while accumulating wealth through systematic murder. The network included local officials who had accepted bribes to ignore evidence of criminal activity, merchants who knowingly purchased stolen goods from the family, and other farmers who had provided assistance with disposing of bodies and concealing evidence. The corruption extended throughout the local community, creating a system of complicity that had protected the family from serious investigation. Federal authorities became involved in the investigation when evidence revealed that the Whitman family's crimes had involved victims from multiple states and had included activities that violated federal laws regarding interstate commerce and mail fraud. U.S. Marshal Robert Hayes was assigned to coordinate the expanded investigation and ensure that all aspects of the case were thoroughly pursued. Marshal Hayes's investigation revealed that the Whitman family had been systematically murdering travelers and workers for nearly 20 years, making them responsible for one of the largest serial killing operations in American history up to that point. The sophistication of their methods and the extent of their criminal network challenged contemporary understanding of organized crime and serial murder. The federal investigation also uncovered evidence that the family had been planning to expand their operations by purchasing additional properties in other states where they could establish similar murder farms. Maps and correspondence found in their possession showed detailed plans for creating a network of agricultural operations that would enable them to kill victims across a much larger geographic area. When federal agents moved to arrest the Whitman family in December 1851, they discovered that Jeremiah, Constance, and their eldest son Jacob had fled the farm, apparently having received advance warning of the impending arrests from corrupt officials within the local law enforcement community. Sarah, Benjamin, and Thomas Whitman were captured at the farm and taken into federal custody. The manhunt for the escaped family members extended across multiple states and continued for several years, with reported sightings and alleged encounters generating hundreds of leads that federal agents pursued without success. The family's apparent ability to evade capture, despite intensive federal investigation, suggested that they possessed both resources and connections that enabled them to stay ahead of law enforcement. The trial of the captured Whitman family members began in Richmond in April 1852, attracting national attention as details of their crimes became public through extensive newspaper coverage. The prosecution, led by Federal Attorney General William Morrison, presented overwhelming evidence of the family's guilt based on the physical evidence recovered from their property and the detailed documentation they had maintained of their criminal activities. The psychological impact of the Whitman case revelations on the surrounding community was devastating and long-lasting. Neighbors who had known and trusted the family for decades were forced to confront the reality that people they had considered friends and fellow Christians had been systematically murdering innocent victims for nearly 20 years. Local residents who had recommended the Whitman farm to travelers or had sent workers to seek employment there suffered severe psychological trauma when they realized their role in inadvertently directing victims to their deaths. The community's sense of trust and social cohesion was permanently damaged by the revelation that such extreme evil had flourished undetected in their midst. The economic impact of the case extended throughout the agricultural community, as farmers faced increased scrutiny from law enforcement and suspicion from potential workers and customers. The association of farming operations with systematic murder made it difficult for legitimate agricultural businesses to attract seasonal labor and maintain normal commercial relationships. The case also had significant effects on law enforcement practices and criminal investigation techniques throughout Virginia and neighboring states. The methods developed during the investigation of the Whitman farm became models for law enforcement agencies dealing with complex cases involving systematic murder and organized criminal activity. The detailed forensic examination of the crime scenes at the Whitman farm contributed to the development of scientific methods for investigating mass murder cases, including techniques for excavating and analyzing burial sites, preserving and documenting physical evidence, and coordinating multi-jurisdictional investigations involving federal and local authorities. The psychological analysis of the Whitman family members provided early insights into the dynamics of family-based criminal organizations and the factors that enable seemingly normal individuals to participate in systematic murder over extended periods. The case contributed to developing understanding of how criminal behavior could be transmitted within families and maintained through systems of mutual dependency and shared culpability. Modern forensic analysis of evidence preserved from the Whitman case has continued to provide insights into the family's methods and the scope of their crimes. DNA analysis has enabled identification of several previously unknown victims, while improved forensic techniques have revealed evidence of torture methods that were not fully understood during the original investigation. The agricultural techniques used by the Whitman family to conceal their crimes have been studied by forensic specialists as examples of how legitimate business operations can be adapted to facilitate criminal activities. The integration of murder and disposal methods with normal farming activities demonstrated a level of criminal sophistication that influenced law enforcement understanding of organized crime operations. The site of the former Whitman farm was eventually sold to developers who subdivided the property into residential lots, though the area's reputation for mass murder made it difficult to attract buyers for many years. Several attempts were made to establish memorial sites documenting the family's crimes, but these efforts were generally opposed by local residents who preferred to forget the area's dark history. The victims of the Whitman family represented a cross-section of American society in the mid-19th century, including immigrants seeking new opportunities, seasonal agricultural workers, traveling merchants, and families moving west in search of land and prosperity. Their deaths deprived their communities of potential contributions while causing immeasurable suffering for families and friends who never learned the fate of their missing relatives. Patrick Sullivan, the Irish immigrant whose murder initiated the family's killing spree, represented thousands of immigrants who came to America seeking opportunities for economic advancement and land ownership. His dream of purchasing his own farm and establishing himself as an American landowner died with him in the tobacco fields where he had sought honest employment. Maria and Carlos Gonzalez, the Mexican siblings whose torture and murder were documented in detail in Sarah Whitman's journal, represented the vulnerability of travelers who depended on the hospitality and assistance of strangers while journeying through unfamiliar territory. Their trust in the apparent Christian charity of the Whitman family led directly to their prolonged torture and eventual murder. The seasonal agricultural workers, who comprised the largest category of victims, were individuals whose labor was essential to American agricultural development, but whose marginalized social status made their disappearances easy to explain and difficult to investigate. Their deaths represented not only individual tragedies, but also the broader exploitation of vulnerable workers whose contributions to American prosperity were often unrecognized and unprotected. The families and individual travelers who were murdered while seeking accommodation at the Whitman farm had placed their trust in the traditional American values of hospitality and mutual assistance that enabled communities to develop and thrive in challenging frontier conditions. Their betrayal and murder represented a fundamental violation of the social bonds that made civilized society possible. Each victim's story represents hopes, dreams, and potential contributions that were destroyed by the Whitman family's greed and sadism. The cumulative impact of their deaths extended far beyond the immediate loss of life to include the destruction of families, the devastation of communities that lost valued members, and the broader social impact of crimes that challenged fundamental assumptions about trust and safety in rural communities. The legacy of the Whitman Homestead case continues to influence discussions about agricultural safety, worker protection, and the responsibility of communities to monitor and investigate suspicious activities that might indicate systematic criminal behavior. The case serves as a reminder that evil can flourish when communities fail to remain vigilant about the welfare of vulnerable individuals who depend on the protection and assistance of others. The agricultural setting of the Whitman family's crimes highlighted the particular vulnerabilities of rural communities, where isolation, seasonal population changes, and economic dependencies create opportunities for exploitation and abuse that might be more difficult to conceal in urban environments. The case contributed to the development of worker protection programs and oversight mechanisms designed to prevent similar exploitation. The religious facade maintained by the Whitman family throughout their criminal career demonstrated how spiritual authority and community respect could be manipulated to provide cover for systematic evil. Their active participation in church activities and charitable organizations, while simultaneously committing mass murder, challenged traditional assumptions about the relationship between religious observance and moral behavior. The case influenced the development of background screening procedures for individuals seeking positions of trust and authority within religious and community organizations. The recognition that criminal behavior could coexist with apparent piety led to increased scrutiny of individuals whose public personas seemed inconsistent with other aspects of their behavior or circumstances. The intergenerational transmission of criminal behavior within the Whitman family provided early evidence that participation in systematic violence could become normalized within family structures where children were raised to view murder as acceptable behavior. The case contributed to understanding of how criminal values could be transmitted from parents to children and reinforced through family dynamics that made participation in illegal activities seem normal or even virtuous. The psychological research based on the Whitman case has continued to influence understanding of family-based criminal organizations and the factors that enable individuals to participate in systematic violence while maintaining normal social relationships and community standing. The detailed documentation of the family's methods and interactions has provided researchers with valuable data about the psychology of organized criminal behavior. In remembering the victims of the Whitman family's systematic evil, we honor not only their individual lives, but also the importance of remaining vigilant against those who would exploit trust and vulnerability for criminal purposes. The 63 confirmed victims of the Whitman Homestead deserve to be remembered as individuals whose lives were cut short by a family that perverted the values of hospitality, hard work, and Christian charity into instruments of death and exploitation. The story of the Whitman Homestead serves as an eternal reminder that evil can take root in the most seemingly wholesome environments when communities fail to protect their most vulnerable members. The family's success in operating undetected for nearly 2 decades was enabled not only by their criminal sophistication, but also by a community's failure to investigate suspicious patterns and protect workers and travelers who depended on their assistance and hospitality. In the end, the macabre story of the Whitman Homestead illustrates both the darkest potential of human nature and the importance of maintaining systems that protect vulnerable individuals from exploitation and abuse. The courage of individuals like Henry Morrison, who reported suspicious discoveries despite the family's community standing, and Dr. William Patterson, who pursued forensic analysis despite social pressure to accept simple explanations, ultimately saved unknown numbers of additional lives and brought justice to families who had lost loved ones to the farm's horror. Their legacy reminds us that the responsibility for protecting the innocent extends beyond law enforcement to include every member of society who has opportunities to observe, investigate, and report suspicious activities that might indicate systematic criminal behavior. The price of safety and justice is eternal vigilance, and our willingness to act when confronted with evidence of evil can mean the difference between justice and tragedy for those who cannot protect themselves. The detailed analysis of evidence recovered from the Whitman farm revealed the sophisticated nature of the family's criminal operation that extended far beyond simple murder for robbery. The family had developed what amounted to an industrial process for killing human beings, with specialized roles for each family member and systematic procedures that maximized both profit and sadistic satisfaction while minimizing the risk of detection. Jacob Whitman's role as the primary executioner involved not only the physical act of killing, but also the development of increasingly refined torture techniques that the family used to extract information from victims about hidden resources and potential connections who might investigate their disappearances. His methods showed continuous evolution and improvement over the years, suggesting active experimentation and learning from experience. The torture chamber discovered beneath the Whitman farmhouse represented one of the most sophisticated criminal facilities uncovered in 19th century America. The underground complex included multiple cells for holding victims, specialized rooms equipped with agricultural tools, adapted for torture, and disposal systems that connected to natural cave formations beneath the property. The engineering required to construct this underground facility demonstrated that the Whitman family had been planning their criminal operation for years before committing their first murder. The complexity of the construction required specialized knowledge of excavation, ventilation, and structural support that suggested either extensive self-education or assistance from skilled accomplices. The torture techniques documented in the family's journals revealed methods specifically designed to keep victims conscious and responsive for extended periods while inflicting maximum psychological and physical suffering. These techniques included the use of farming chemicals to cause painful burns, systematic bone breaking using livestock restraint equipment, and psychological torture involving threats against family members. Sarah Whitman's journal entries provided the most detailed documentation of systematic torture ever discovered by American law enforcement up to that point. Her clinical descriptions of victim responses to different forms of abuse revealed a level of sadistic sophistication that challenged contemporary understanding of criminal psychology and the capacity for evil within apparently normal individuals. One particularly disturbing series of entries documented the family's treatment of the Morrison family. Parents James and Ellen Morrison, with their 3 children aged 8, 12, and 15, who had sought shelter at the farm during a severe winter storm in January 1849. The family had been traveling from Pennsylvania to establish a homestead in Kentucky when weather made further travel impossible. The Morrison family represented ideal victims from the Whitman perspective. They traveled with substantial resources, including livestock, farm equipment, and gold coins intended for land purchase. They had no immediate connections who would investigate their disappearance quickly, and their status as travelers made it easy to explain their absence as evidence that they had continued their journey when weather improved. Sarah's journal documented the systematic psychological destruction of the Morrison family over a period of 6 weeks, during which the parents were forced to watch, while their children were subjected to increasingly severe torture, designed to extract information about money and valuables hidden in their wagon. The psychological impact of being unable to protect their children while witnessing their systematic abuse was carefully calculated to maximize the parents' suffering. The family's treatment of 8-year-old Lucy Morrison was documented in detail that revealed the depths of depravity to which the Whitmans had descended. The child was subjected to torture specifically designed to terrorize her siblings and parents, including mock executions, deliberate infliction of painful but non-fatal injuries, and psychological abuse involving threats of even worse treatment if the family failed to cooperate fully. The murder of the Morrison family was carried out using one of the Whitman family's preferred methods: burial alive in specially prepared graves that allowed the victims to remain conscious during the early stages of suffocation. The parents were buried first while the children were forced to watch. Then the children were buried in adjacent graves where they could hear each other's final struggles. This method of murder provided maximum satisfaction for the Whitman family's sadistic impulses, while ensuring that no evidence would survive that could definitively prove deliberate murder rather than accidental death. The technique required careful preparation and timing, demonstrating the premeditated nature of their crimes and their sophisticated understanding of how to conceal evidence. The discovery of the Morrison family's remains during the 1851 investigation provided some of the most compelling evidence of the Whitman family's systematic approach to murder and torture. Personal effects found with the bodies confirmed their identities and established connections to missing persons reports filed in Pennsylvania and Kentucky. The investigation also revealed that the Whitman family had been systematically forging documents and impersonating victims to claim ownership of their property and resources after their deaths. This aspect of their criminal operation required sophisticated understanding of legal procedures and access to official documents that suggested corruption or complicity within government agencies. The forgery operation included the creation of false bills of sale, property deeds, and estate documents that transferred ownership of victims' assets to entities controlled by the Whitman family. These documents were sufficiently convincing to pass official scrutiny, enabling the family to claim legitimate ownership of stolen property worth thousands of dollars. The family had also developed techniques for impersonating deceased victims in correspondence with business associates and family members, maintaining the fiction that missing persons were alive and conducting business in distant locations. This deception bought time for evidence to be destroyed and for investigations to be abandoned or misdirected. Federal investigators discovered that the Whitman family's criminal network included corrupt officials in multiple counties who accepted bribes to validate fraudulent documents and ignore evidence of criminal activity. This corruption was essential to the family's success in converting stolen property into legitimate wealth while avoiding prosecution for their crimes. The network also included merchants and traders who knowingly purchased goods from the Whitmans at below-market prices while asking no questions about the origins of valuable items that appeared sporadically in large quantities. These commercial relationships provided the family with reliable methods for converting stolen property into cash while maintaining their facade of legitimate agricultural prosperity. The expansion plans discovered among the family's papers revealed their intention to establish similar murder operations in multiple states, creating a network of agricultural properties where systematic killing could be conducted using the same methods that had proven successful in Virginia. Maps and correspondence showed detailed planning for properties in Kentucky, Tennessee, and North Carolina. The proposed expansion would have enabled the Whitman family to kill victims across a much larger geographic area while reducing the risk that patterns of disappearances would be noticed in any single location. The sophistication of these plans suggested that the family viewed their criminal activities as a scalable business enterprise that could be expanded systematically. Federal authorities believed that the family's escape in 1851 had been facilitated by advance warning from corrupt officials who were paid to provide information about impending law enforcement activities. The timing of their departure, occurring just hours before federal agents arrived to execute arrest warrants, suggested access to real-time intelligence about the investigation. The manhunt for the escaped family members revealed the extent of their criminal network and the resources they had accumulated through nearly 2 decades of systematic murder. Reported sightings came from multiple states, suggesting that the family possessed both the financial means and the connections necessary to evade capture across vast geographic areas. Several confirmed encounters with the fugitive family members revealed that they were continuing their criminal activities while evading capture, adapting their methods to new environments and opportunities. Reports from Texas, California, and Mexico suggested that they had established new murder operations using variations of the techniques developed at their Virginia farm. The psychological profiles developed during the investigation revealed that each family member had developed specialized psychological adaptations that enabled them to participate in systematic murder while maintaining normal social relationships and community standing. These adaptations included sophisticated compartmentalization techniques and rationalization systems that allowed them to view their crimes as justified or even virtuous. Jeremiah Whitman's psychological profile revealed a man who had developed elaborate theological justifications for murder that portrayed his victims as morally inferior individuals whose death served divine purposes. His ability to integrate systematic killing with sincere religious observance represented a form of moral compartmentalization that challenged contemporary understanding of human psychology. Constance Whitman's profile showed how maternal instincts could be perverted into sadistic pleasure, derived from nurturing victims before betraying them to torture and death. Her role in providing hospitality and care to potential victims made their eventual betrayal particularly psychologically devastating, and demonstrated how traditional female roles could be weaponized for criminal purposes. The psychological development of the Whitman children revealed how criminal behavior could be transmitted across generations through gradual exposure to violence and systematic training in criminal techniques. The children had been raised to view murder as normal family activity, resulting in psychological development that was fundamentally different from normal moral development. The trial of Sarah, Benjamin, and Thomas Whitman provided unprecedented insights into the psychology of family-based criminal organizations and the factors that enable multiple individuals to participate in systematic violence over extended periods. Their testimonies revealed the internal dynamics and decision-making processes that had sustained their criminal operation for nearly 2 decades. Sarah's testimony was particularly revealing about the psychological mechanisms that had enabled her to participate in systematic torture and murder while maintaining normal social relationships with community members who were not targeted for death. Her ability to compartmentalize her criminal activities from her social persona demonstrated sophisticated psychological adaptation to criminal lifestyle. The testimony also revealed the extent of planning and preparation that had gone into the family's criminal activities, including detailed victim profiles, systematic surveillance of potential targets, and careful timing of murders to coincide with seasonal work patterns that would provide natural explanations for disappearances. The economic analysis of the Whitman family's criminal enterprise revealed that they had generated more income from murder and robbery than from their legitimate agricultural activities, making systematic killing their primary source of revenue rather than a supplementary criminal activity. This economic dependence on murder had created powerful incentives for continuing and expanding their criminal operations. The family's financial records showed systematic investment of murder profits in expanding their agricultural operations, purchasing additional land, and acquiring equipment that enhanced both their legitimate farming activities and their criminal capabilities. This reinvestment strategy had enabled them to increase both the scale and sophistication of their operations over time. The impact of the Whitman case on American agricultural communities was profound and lasting, as farmers throughout the country faced increased scrutiny and suspicion from potential workers and customers who had learned to associate isolated rural properties with systematic murder. Many legitimate agricultural operations suffered economic losses as workers became reluctant to seek employment on remote farms. The case also influenced the development of worker protection programs and oversight mechanisms designed to prevent exploitation of seasonal agricultural labor. Government agencies established systems for tracking the movement of migrant workers and investigating reports of suspicious disappearances or working conditions. The religious community was particularly affected by the revelation that active church members had used their religious authority to facilitate systematic murder over nearly 2 decades. Churches throughout Virginia and neighboring states faced questions about their ability to identify and prevent criminal behavior among their leadership and membership. The case contributed to the development of background screening procedures for individuals seeking positions of authority within religious organizations, as communities recognized that criminal behavior could coexist with apparent piety and religious knowledge. The Whitman family's ability to maintain active church membership while committing mass murder challenged traditional assumptions about the relationship between religious observance and moral behavior. The forensic techniques developed during the investigation of the Whitman farm influenced law enforcement practices throughout the United States, particularly in cases involving systematic murder and organized criminal activity. The methods used to excavate and analyze the crime scenes became models for forensic investigators dealing with mass murder cases. The detailed documentation and analysis of the physical evidence recovered from the farm contributed to the development of scientific approaches to criminal investigation that emphasized systematic collection and preservation of evidence rather than reliance on witness testimony and confessions. These techniques proved essential for prosecuting complex cases involving multiple victims and sophisticated criminal operations. The psychological research based on the Whitman case contributed to early understanding of serial murder and organized criminal behavior, providing insights that influenced the development of criminal profiling techniques and investigative psychology. The detailed records kept by the family provided researchers with unprecedented access to the thoughts and methods of systematic killers. Modern forensic analysis of evidence preserved from the Whitman case has continued to provide insights into the family's methods and the scope of their crimes. DNA analysis has enabled identification of several previously unknown victims, while improved forensic techniques have revealed evidence of torture methods that were not fully understood during the original investigation. The site of the former Whitman farm has been the subject of ongoing archaeological investigation as researchers attempt to locate additional burial sites and gather evidence about victims who may not have been discovered during the original excavation. Ground-penetrating radar and other modern techniques have revealed anomalies consistent with additional human burials throughout the property. The continued investigation has confirmed that the total number of victims was likely significantly higher than the 63 cases that were definitively proven during the original investigation. Estimates based on archaeological evidence and historical analysis suggest that the actual number of victims may have exceeded 100 individuals killed over the family's 20-year criminal career. The agricultural community's response to the Whitman revelations included the development of industry-wide standards and practices designed to protect workers and identify potential criminal activity among farm operators. These standards included background checks for farm owners, regular inspections of worker housing and conditions, and communication systems for reporting suspicious activities. Transportation companies and government agencies established systems for tracking the movement of travelers through agricultural regions, creating communication networks that would quickly identify missing persons and coordinate search efforts. These systems were designed to prevent isolated criminal operations from claiming multiple victims before being detected. The cultural impact of the Whitman case influenced American literature, journalism, and popular entertainment for decades, as the story was retold in numerous books, articles, and eventually films that often embellished the actual facts while keeping public attention focused on the case and its implications for rural safety and community vigilance. The case established many conventions of agricultural crime, reporting that emphasized the vulnerability of seasonal workers and the potential for criminal activity to flourish in isolated rural environments. These themes became standard elements of crime journalism and influenced public perceptions of agricultural safety for generations. Local folklore about the Whitman farm developed numerous supernatural explanations for the family's crimes, including stories about demonic possession, ancient curses, and evil spirits that had influenced the family's behavior. While these supernatural interpretations were not supported by evidence, they served important social functions by providing explanations for incomprehensible evil and warning community members about potential dangers. The memorial efforts for Whitman family victims were complicated by the large number of casualties and the difficulty of identifying many of the remains recovered from the property. Several attempts were made to establish comprehensive memorials listing all known victims, but these efforts were hindered by gaps in the historical record and ongoing debates about the total number of casualties. The individual stories of confirmed victims provide human context for understanding the broader impact of the Whitman family's systematic evil. Patrick Sullivan's dream of land ownership, Maria and Carlos Gonzalez's journey toward new opportunities, the Morrison family's westward migration, each represents hopes and aspirations that were destroyed by criminal predators who viewed human lives as nothing more than sources of profit and sadistic entertainment. The children who died at the Whitman farm deserve particular remembrance as victims whose death served no purpose beyond satisfying the family's sadistic impulses. 8-year-old Lucy Morrison, 12-year-old Carlos Gonzalez, and dozens of other children whose names may never be known represent the most innocent victims of crimes that violated every principle of human decency and community protection. The seasonal workers who comprised the largest category of victims were individuals whose labor was essential to American agricultural development, but whose marginalized social status made their disappearances easy to explain and difficult to investigate effectively. Their deaths highlight the particular vulnerability of workers who depend on temporary employment and the trust of strangers for survival. The legacy of worker protection programs and safety regulations that developed in response to the Whitman case has continued to evolve as agricultural communities work to prevent exploitation and abuse of vulnerable laborers. These programs represent positive developments that emerged from the tragedy of systematic murder and serve as memorials to victims whose deaths contributed to improved protection for future workers. The educational value of the Whitman case continues to influence training programs for law enforcement officers, social workers, and community leaders who work to identify and prevent systematic criminal activity. The case provides clear examples of warning signs that might indicate criminal behavior and demonstrates the importance of thorough investigation when suspicious patterns are identified. In the end, the macabre story of the Whitman Homestead serves as a permanent reminder that evil can flourish when communities fail to protect their most vulnerable members, and that the responsibility for preventing systematic criminal activity extends beyond law enforcement to include every citizen who has opportunities to observe, report, and act against suspicious activities that might indicate criminal behavior. The courage of individuals like Mary Catherine Fletcher, who reported hearing screams in the cornfields despite being dismissed by adults, and Henry Morrison, who insisted on investigating suspicious bone fragments despite social pressure to accept simple explanations, ultimately led to the discovery of one of the most extensive murder operations in American history. Their example reminds us that vigilance and courage in reporting suspicious activities can mean the difference between justice and continued tragedy for vulnerable individuals who depend on community protection. The 63 confirmed victims of the Whitman family did not die in vain if their sacrifice teaches us to remain forever watchful against predators who would exploit trust and vulnerability for criminal purposes. The story of the Whitman Homestead will forever stand as one of the darkest chapters in American agricultural history, a reminder that the most productive fields can conceal the most terrible secrets, and that our willingness to investigate disturbing evidence, even when it challenges our assumptions about trusted community members, can save lives and bring justice to those who cannot speak for themselves.